Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us. The performance part of this vernacular style webinar will last for about 45 minutes. Please use the comments function to add any, the chat function rather, to add any comments or thoughts that you have during the performance, but use the Q&A function to add any questions so that we can pick them up at the end when we have a discussion. Right, so we've been charting the story of the Mayflower for 3 years now, approaching it from different perspectives.
As far as you can.
It's been a journey about a journey.
We looked at the politics, the law, and the money, the cost. We listened to voices from the Wampanoag, learning from their land.
We considered the consequences, what happened later, the disqualification of beliefs, the stupid arrogance of the white man.
Nothing's changed, really.
This is a reflection on our charting, on the dealings, the measurings, the arrivings.
And the questions we're left with.
Do you have any regrets?
Are you happy now?
What exactly did you expect to find there?
We started with the people who were actually on the boat.
Why they went, what they wore, when they died.
Everyone in the group had to choose a person, a passenger who was on the boat. And the reason we're here is...
Dorothy.
Dorothy. We all chose Dorothy.
We wondered if we should choose someone else.
But Dorothy was our first choice.
Or she had chosen us.
Spooky.
She was a maidservant.
Little is known about her.
She married, then died a year or two after here in this place.
We only know her name from her husband's apprenticeship record.
So let Dorothy be our guide.
Where first? England or America?
America, Mum.
America.
North America.
Turtle Island.
New England.
Cape Cod.
Dorothy,
Mum?
before you left, what did you know of America?
Nothing.
But did you not read about it?
Can't read.
Did they not tell you what to expect?
Yes?
What?
Food. Food would be plentiful.
Anything else?
Freedom.
And the people?
People? Well, they didn't say anything about people, just food.
The people who lived there. The people who saved you, Dorothy.
Many tribes, many people.
The Nauset Nation.
Massachusetts.
Patuxet.
Shinnecock.
No, you said cock.
Dorothy, listen.
And the Wampanoag. The people of the first light. The people who saved you, Dorothy.
They lived with the land, from the land.
Walhalla.
The concept of the common pot. The pot we give to and take from.
Sharing of resources.
They were strong, vibrant, healthy people.
But there were graves.
The pandemic. Before the Mayflower, other Europeans, traders, fishermen, raiders, kidnappers, they brought smallpox.
The native people had no immunity.
The place was deserted.
Of 12,000 Wampanoag, 9,000 died. Of those who survived, they moved to their winter hunting grounds inland.
They came back to find you there. They watched. They helped you. You were lucky.
There was their chief.
Their sachem, Massasoit.
I saw him.
He and his people helped you, taught you how to farm, where to fish. And what did we give them? What did you give them?
Apart from disease?
The true word of God.
The true word of God. But how to hear that word? Who should mediate the word of God? That's what concerned many of the passengers on the Mayflower, and that's what caused many of them to migrate.
Our project is based in Southwark, home of
The Clink.
Southwark Cathedral,
The Bricklayers' Arms,
Rotherhithe.
and Graham Taylor, local historian.
Southwark is a key part of our story, and Graham is a key storyteller. As trade grew through the 16th century, so did literacy. More and more merchants read the Bible, now printed in English for the first time. And they found explosive material. We're quoting Graham here. Criticism of the aristocracy, the monarchy, and even the church. And to make matters worse, they would think. Wouldn't they, Graham?
Yes.
They're thinking...
Judith, that's not Graham.
What?
Ian.
Is it? Where's Graham?
He wouldn't do it. He said F and email. I'm doing my best. I'm about his height.
Can I finish my bit now? They're thinking, plus the ideas that...
Crikey, have you read that, Jan?
Plus the ideas that the
Hang
separatists
on
had
a
picked
sec,
up...
Tracy. Ian, I think you should read that out.
As Graham?
As Graham.
I've never met him.
Well, he's very tall.
His book's great.
Okay, it's a nice script. There is, however, a problem. The overall tenor of the script runs directly counter to my own view of the Mayflower expedition. I regard the Pilgrims as proto-democratic, anti-colonialist, anti-slavery and pro-Indian. Associating the Pilgrims with ill treatment of Indians or with colonial conquests is unjust to them and their intentions. That does not change my support for your project as set out above, but it does mean that I'd better not appear in the show myself.
Bombshell.
So, that's why I'm here.
Come on, Tracy, get on with it.
The ideas that the separatists had picked up in other countries led to the setting up of independent churches, gathering churches. What's a gathering church, Graham? Ian?
Oh, I know. Congregations didn't attend because they lived in a certain parish and because they had to, but because they wanted to. And they wanted to worship with other believers who weren't attending because of the law, but because they wanted to too.
That's great, Jan. You've read his book too.
There's a lovely bit here. They could look along the pews of the parish churches and spot atheists, papists, heretics, whores, adulterers, and perjurers. They rejected this and the Book of Common Prayer. It killed spontaneity. Prayer should come from the heart.
So they separated from the Church of England and became known as
separatists.
This was illegal. People had to attend the parish churches to hear government policies pronounced from the pulpits. But all over the country, separatists met to worship freely, trying to avoid arrest.
In London, separatist leaders were arrested. Many were imprisoned in the Clink.
They were interrogated, and one was hung in Southwark, near Bricklayers' Roundabout.
So they fled to Holland. But this was only a temporary home.
A short-term solution.
A plaster over the bleeding wound of radical faith.
Dorothy, were you a radical?
No.
A separatist?
No.
But you knew separatists.
My master might have had beliefs, but...
So you associated with, you worked for, dissenters.
I did no thinking. I washed their smalls and said my prayers. I did no thinking.
How did you get to America, Dorothy?
Ask London, ask the king.
So, London, did you have any part in this Mayflower business?
In the early 1500s, London was a backwater, but it was to grow. It had to grow. It needed new territory.
The Pope had already given his blessing to our enemies, Spain and Portugal, to claim most of South America.
England was getting left behind.
Sounds like a space race.
And North America remained relatively untouched by the Europeans, apart from some fishing and light trade.
Oh, and kidnapping.
But what right did they have? It wasn't theirs.
Well, Queen Elizabeth sought advice on whether North America could legally be claimed for England.
Due diligence. The Queen's advisors said...
Yes.
In-depth research by John Dee, you'll meet him later, his in-depth research quite clearly revealed that America belonged to England as King Arthur had conquered it in 530.
So, in the 50 years before the Mayflower, there were attempts to colonize North America. Let us remember a few.
Let us. Why are you sounding so Ponthian?
Humphrey Gilbert took 11 ships, which were unfortunately blown back to the Isle of Wight.
Drake sails round the Magellan Straits and spent 5 weeks with the Maibok Indians, then claimed their territory as Nova Albion.
In 1602, Bartholomew Gosnold.
He takes a single ship from Falmouth with 32 men, and they fish, trade, and plant crops. But, put off by the fierce winter, no one settles.
So we gave up. Surely we gave up.
Why is a king like a book?
Oh, I don't know. Why is a king like a book?
I know. Because they both have pages.
No!
Yes, they do.
Okay, yes, but what I was driving at is they both have power, and books still presented America as a solution to England's economic problems.
Here is a king with a book. Lethal combination.
The new king, James, has been given the Jewel of Artes, a beautiful and practical guide to founding a colony.
It inspires him. In 1606, he helped found a new joint stock enterprise.
Yeah, the London, Virginia Company. It will oversee the planting of America.
In 1607, James has a town named after him, Jamestown.
Oh, so that's where it comes from. Jamestown. I never realized.
But it doesn't thrive. No, many people die and investors lose money and it makes many enemies.
So the company grants more charters. Other attempts are made.
But that doesn't really work either.
Why?
Interesting question. Kath?
Well, no women. No, not any women to start with anyway. All men, all armed, all in it for the money. And they were even more evangelical than the Mayflower lot.
The Mayflower bought families. They came to settle. They didn't try to convert.
And they had asked the Virginia Company for a charter.
They might make it work.
First, King James has to give his approval. Remember, he opposes separatists.
If he says yes, they'd get 80,000 acres, fishing rights, permission to trade with local Indians, and self-government.
And he'd be rid of them. So he approves the idea. All they need now is the money.
Did someone say money?
Enter Thomas Weston, a young English merchant, but not among the great rank of merchants.
Apparently, Weston had a persuasive style. He had much conference with the Leiden leaders. He could help them. He has friends.
He begins to raise funds and he attracts some 70 investors.
It is said I raised £7,000.
There's no actual record, and like the king, he paid no attention to detail. There was no long-range goals beyond this single voyage.
In the summer of 1620, the final contract was drawn up. Every settler over the age of 16 would receive 1 share.
Will I get a share?
You are a woman, are you not?
I'm a girl. I'm working. I'm serving.
If you survive and marry, your husband will get a share.
Oh, nice.
And in July 1620, approximately 100 passengers and 30 crew members set sail for America. What could possibly go wrong?
Early on, we did an event. We called it the measuring.
To measure. To ascertain the size of something by using an instrument marked in standard units. To assess the importance, effect, or value of something.
No one knows the exact size of me. No one knows of my heft or span. But to build a ship is to build an intention that creaks and sways and doesn't always hold water.
Dorothy?
You or me?
Your turn. I want to tell them about the measuring.
Dorothy?
Miss?
Dorothy, what do we know?
We know the crew number between 15 and 30. We know there was a ship's master, Christopher Jones, who lived in Rotherhithe and is buried near the church. He's got a memorial.
Someone knocked his nose off.
And a ship's pilot and the master's mate, John Clark. He'd been to America previously.
Another frequent flyer was the master's mate, Robert Coppin. He claimed to have been to New England on a previous voyage and to have some experience of whaling.
When we did the event, we marked out what experts thought the size of the Mayflower might be. About 100 foot long by 20 foot across. Then we asked people to get on board to see how much space they had.
The provisions were loaded. Every contingency had to be provided for. They knew, of course, that there would be trees and therefore timber, but it takes time to make furniture, especially when there are no houses to put it in. So they took enough to furnish, after a fashion, 19 cottages.
This is what we have read.
From Holland, they brought salt, nets, cheese, and strong waters. From Southampton, boxes of smoked herring, dried ox tongues, smoked sacks of turnips, onions and beans, salted and spiced beef, hogsheads of oatmeal,
Wheat flour and Spanish rusk, tubs of pickled eggs and firkins of butter, each holding 56 pounds.
They brought salt-dried cod called haberdine,
Ginger,
pepper,
cinnamon,
mace. Dorothy, have you got the list?
Yes, miss.
nutmeg, wormwood and green ginger, conserves of roses, prunes and burned wine, pipes of Holland gin, French brandy, casks of beer and wine.
This is what we have read.
Here's a time-lapse film of the measuring event. It gives you an idea of the layout.
Pigs and goats kept on the spar deck forward, a few sheep and some rabbits and poultry, some for use during the journey. Family pets, principally cats and cage birds. Peter Brown took his large bitch mastiff and John Goodman took his little spaniel.
The spooky thing was the number. Experts think there were 132 people on board. At the measuring, I was asked to do a count of the number of people that were there. There weren't tickets as such, it was very informal. So at the end, I counted. I counted once and then again. There were exactly 132 people present.
The two vessels, the Mayflower and the Speedwell, left in the last week of July.
350 miles into the Atlantic, the smaller Speedwell started to take on water.
Please remain composed, Dorothy. They returned to Dartmouth. After repairs were made, they set off again.
Again, there was a leak.
And calmly they returned, this time to Plymouth. It was decided that the Speedwell would not make the voyage. As many passengers as was possible were taken on board the Mayflower. It left Plymouth on Wednesday, 6th of September.
So, you want to know who we are? The passengers, the settlers.
We died in the first few months, weeks, days.
It is much celebrated that but one life was lost on the voyage.
An ungodly life at that.
And one life was given.
He died too.
It is less spoken of that many, mainly women, died before the first planting.
Few words are spent on them.
But you wanted to know who we are.
Were.
We came from all over.
Some knew each other from before, from Holland, but most were thrown together.
17 different accents.
From Scrooby to Sandwich.
Worcester to Wapping.
All ages, all backgrounds, some with servants.
Like Dorothy.
Families, singletons.
Believers, rogues.
Leaders, sheep.
Dogs, chickens, goats.
Furniture, boots and shoes.
But you want to connect. You want to somehow understand them.
Why did your passenger go, Andrew?
Commerce.
Trade. He sells shoes. He took shoes. He talks cobblers.
And you?
Nothing for me at home.
Ian?
I can no longer abide the beliefs and practices of our country's organised religion. It is not what God ordained. No true alternative is now tolerated. We must worship from our hearts, our true hearts. We must bring others to our church. We must start anew.
What about you, Anne? Haven't you got a sympathetic story that we can relate to?
Well, I'm Mrs. Chilton. I've a husband and a daughter. We're middling settled. We lived in Sandwich. We got on the Mayflower. We crossed over to America and we died. How's that?
Are we empathising?
What did you die of?
Pneumonia.
Got any hobbies?
No.
Got any interesting stories?
No.
What's your husband like?
Dead.
So, why are we remembering you?
Dunno.
Land ahoy!
Land!
This is the land of Southwark, by the river, the graveyard of the cathedral, and this is the memorial to Mahomet Weanoman.
A Mohegan sachem or chief.
The Indians' understanding of land rights were very different to the Europeans. They just believed...
They are.
Sorry?
Are.
Ah. Oh. The Indians' understanding of land rights are very different to the Europeans. Families had and have relationships to hunting and planting grounds that are long-standing, generational. Families came together to fish.
Come.
Oh, sorry. Families come together to fish or hunt, living by the seasons. Their teaching, their beliefs, their way of recording events, all was very immediate.
Is.
Oh, look, do you want to do it?
No, it's fine. It's fine.
Mahomet Weanoman came to London in 1735 to petition the king. We don't actually know where his exact remains are. They're somewhere in the graveyard, this side of the river.
This side of the river, very important.
Mahomet had come to petition the king George II to return stolen land.
There's a map.
Yes, you can see the next wave of settlers acquired land. Tribes were expelled from their hunting grounds. To the English, land was not for stewardship, but for dominion.
It was yours or mine, not ours.
The Indians thought this was rude, stupid, self-defeating.
What would the land say?
Some lived with me, on me, in me. Others named me, mapped me, sold me. Some cast me as a character and wove me into stories. Others found false edges and fenced fields into farms.
Eloquent.
So, 200 years after the Mayflower, Mahomet and the 3 others came to London to argue for the return of land stolen by the English.
And he died across the river in the city of smallpox.
So why is he here?
Foreigners were not allowed to be buried in the city.
Mahomet was not the first Indian to visit London, just as the Mayflower was not the first English boat to visit America.
Some came as emissaries. Some paddled a canoe on the Thames at Westminster. They came to learn about the newcomers to their land, came to see their dwellings and know their ways, to learn their language, to return with stories, to trade.
That's all lovely, Judith, but most were captured, and that's not in the curriculum. That's left out of Thanksgivings.
Mahomet died across the river, waiting to petition the king. How did he make his last journey across the Thames? By water?
Carried by bearers?
A horse-drawn hearse?
And he was laid in the earth, here.
Dorothy?
My turn?
Yes.
Dorothy?
Ma'am?
What do you have to say about the land?
Well, there's lots more rocks than at home, but it drains well, and if we work it and learn the Indian ways of planting, it will provide for us.
During the first lockdown, we created an event called The Consequences, online, like this. The question was, what were the consequences of the Mayflower? Well, one was...
Quannock became Philadelphia. Shamut became Boston. Ogopogie became Santa Fe.
Wasn't the Mayflower?
Hush, Dorothy.
That was years later.
But it was a consequence.
The Mayflower arrived late. The leak had delayed the departure. Winter was waiting. The cold, the damp, it killed many. But in the new year, the new spring...
The Indians came! The Indians came!
2 spoke English. 1 had been captured and taken to Europe.
Squanto.
He had learned our language before travelling back to the Wampanoag homeland to find his tribe, the Patuxet, to find that they had been decimated by a pandemic.
He acted as a friend and intermediary.
The Wampanoag who had survived needed allies too. They made an agreement with the settlers.
That was the contract. It was signed and proper.
The settlers built houses and fences. They tried to pay off their debt to the investors, sending timber and furs back to London.
We worked and prayed and worked and prayed.
Chicago became Chicago.
That was later.
But you were the first.
It was those who came after, the Puritans, the rigid ones.
More and more people arrived from England. They brought weapons,
books,
cattle.
They said they had the authority of the word of God and the king to do this.
Smallpox visited the Indians again, and that king pronounced...
There having God's visitation reigned a wonderful plague, so there are not left any that do claim or challenge any interest therein.
By the mid-1630s, there were about 400 people living in Plymouth.
You're leaving a lot out.
By 1640, 20,000 had arrived. The contract was torn up.
We introduced schools, a university.
Harvard.
Yes.
Dorothy, we took resources.
We were trying to survive.
Then it was beaver skins and timber. Today it's gas and oil.
Manhattan meant Island of the Hills. Guess what it became?
New York?
Correct.
Following the guns and the cattle came the gospel.
The church, friendship, worship, love.
Praying towns.
That's after.
Towns where converted Indians were allowed to live, replacing seasonal movement and seasonal and free movement. Then later reservations. The land of the Cape Cod Wampanoag was 300 square miles. Dorothy, today it is 23 square miles.
Anyone heard of Manifest Destiny? For proponents of Manifest Destiny, the American Indians were blocks to the forward march of progress.
But our leaders learned their language, their culture.
The ideology of Manifest Destiny justified extreme measures.
Cured them of illness.
Such as clearing the native population from the land.
Forced removal and violent extermination.
When a people, a nation are subjected to oppression, their agency and lands taken from them, communities as a whole experience collective trauma. They suffer a blow to the basic tissues of social life. It damages the bonds attaching people together and impairs their sense of community.
We need a scapegoat. So, who's to blame? What's to blame? Perhaps we require a public inquiry.
Order, order! Judge Judith is in court. Here I am, grilling the guilty, sentencing the sinners, punishing the plunderers. Bring forth the first witness.
And you are?
Christopher Jones, Master, Freeman, Burgess of Harwich, part owner of the Mayflower.
And your friend?
Oh, that's John Clark, pilot, much travelled.
What is wrong with your nose, Master Jones?
Vandals, Your Honour, Judge, Sir. Young Herbert's knocked it off.
The people of Rotherhithe have raised funds to fix it, Chris.
So what do you carry?
Wine mainly, some spirits.
Cheese?
Cheese occasionally. It's all quality stuff.
People?
What?
You carry people, humans.
Well, yes, now and again, but it's mainly the wine. You can look at my books. It's a respectable business.
Profitable?
Well, yes, but I pay my taxes. I pay the duty.
And how much did you receive for the voyage to the New World? Were you paid per head?
No one died.
One did, Chris.
One man died, just one.
Accident.
What happened?
Fell overboard. Waste of space. Sorry, lack of space.
There was a gale. He was blown overboard. Only man lost.
Sorry, Chris, two died.
John?
Dysentery.
Two. Just two souls were lost.
From how many?
Did anyone do a count, John?
About 130.
510.
So the charge is?
People smuggling, my lord.
Your Honour?
Put them on mute. Next witness.
Name?
John D.
John D. You were born in 1527.
Yes. and died in 1608, so I really don't know why I'm here. I'm compost by the time Mayflower sails.
John Dee, you advised the Queen and coined the term British Empire.
Oh, I nicked it, actually.
You justified England's claim on America.
Well, King Arthur conquered America, I told her.
Elizabeth?
Yeah, she was a bit conflicted, so I put her right.
By telling her about King James conquering America in the 5th century.
Oh, ish. And then Mad Dog got there.
Mad Dog?
Mad Dog, Ab Owen Gwyneth sailed there in 1170.
Isn't that part of a fairy tale, John?
No, it might be.
Next.
And you are?
The Thames.
I'm sorry?
The Thames. The river. Wet. Goes in and out, up and down.
Yes, right. Continue.
So, River Thames, why are you here?
It's the guilt. The memories. I've got to come clean. The sounds. The voices.
Take your time.
Are you taking the piss?
No, sorry.
Do you know what it feels like? To see them come and go, embarking on their adventures, coming home with their souvenirs?
Who?
People.
Well, that's people. That's what they do. It's not your fault.
It is. If it wasn't for me, with my deep harbors and my sheltered bits, if it wasn't for me, there wouldn't be no people.
Yes.
And there wouldn't be no ships.
You have a point.
I don't have a point. That's my problem. I'm all curves and welcomes. These merchants, they used me, took me for all I've got, packed my banks with cargo so they could pack their banks with lolly.
You shouldn't take it personally.
I do. If I hadn't been so accessible, there wouldn't be no Londinium.
London.
Is that what they call it now?
Yes.
If I hadn't been so fordable, there wouldn't have been no city, no merchants, no docks, no Mayflower.
It would have gone from another port.
What?
Southampton, Bristol, Plymouth.
No, Plymouth? Why would anyone go to Plymouth?
Thank you for your input.
And then they were here.
Pardon?
They brought a canoe one morning down near Westminster. They paddled across my surface. 1603, September. Londoners lined my banks to watch Indians. Imagine it. Indians in London in a small boat. Tiny.
Next.
Oh, there's map makers, publisher.
Couple of traders, investors.
Scientists.
Lots of theologians.
Look, if we question every historical character and geographical feature that contributed to England's colonialism, we'll be here all night.
Please be upstanding for the king.
Okay, let's get this over with.
And you are?
You're joking, aren't you?
King James?
And the rest.
The 1st of England, the 6th of Scotland?
Okay, yes.
Your Highness, it could be said your attitude to the Mayflower was, what shall we say?
Nuanced.
Sloppy.
Would it be fair to say that you encouraged the separatists to colonise New England?
Might have.
And who were you describing when you used these words? Brain sick, rash, heady, vain, proud, ungrateful, pharisaical, fanatical, seditious, conceited.
Separatists.
A little louder, Your Highness.
Separatists. Look, God didn't grant me with a full set of teeth. Speaking is difficult.
And why would you want to send a brain-sick and fanatical sect across the Atlantic?
To secure the health of the kingdom, to expel the poison from the body politic.
And I believe you called them a swarm?
With an E, swarmy.
And gave them an ambiguous legal agreement.
Yes, there was some confusion over the latitude, yes.
Not a confusion, Your Highness, an overlap. You gave the same land that was not yours to give to two separate companies. Sloppy, James, sloppy.
Look, Mummy had her head cut off, my father was assassinated, and Guy Fawkes tried to blow me up. My wife had died, so when the separatists approached me, I thought it was going to be a win-win situation.
Next witness!
Do you know how lonely it is to be a king?
Next witness!
Call Mr. Matchlock.
Call Mr. Matchlock. Mr. Matchlock.
He's also known as Mr. Thunderstick.
Call Mr. Thunderstick.
Or the manifestation on Earth of the horned underwater serpent as well as the Thunderbird.
Calling the manifestation on Earth of the horned underwater serpent as well as the Thunderbird.
I am here.
You have been summoned here to explain.
I need little explanation.
Well, perhaps you could tell us your role in this.
I am a piece of work, a simple construction. I'm designed for a very particular purpose. A weapon, arma, waffe, ohan ijagan, owista santuit.
Could I remind you to speak in English?
Why? I am fluent in all tongues. I respect no borders, you know that.
I don't. Be clear, sir.
I am of wood and metal made. Men love me. Men want me. Men fear me. I am ferocious.
Someone find the usher, please.
The chitke squee. The hand is red.
Usher!
Acquit. Niece. Nis. Yow.
No!
Honor.
Call the servant girl.
Dorothy! Mom?
Dorothy!
Yes, Mum.
Dorothy?
What, Mum?
Step into the dock.
But I ain't done nothing.
I went as a servant.
It wasn't my doing.
Why are there three of you?
We all wanted to be her.
She gets ignored.
She's an enigma.
Read the charges.
Dorothy, servant girl, wife, mother. You are being charged with illegal appropriation of the land, the removal of the dwellers, the extraction of resources, the alienation of generations.
Me? I did that.
You, your husband, your children, and a gun, a captain, a ship, a mathematician, a church, a king, a river, a servant girl, they all contributed to this atrocity.
And us?
Us?
We mark it, we remember it, Mayflower 400, merchandise, tourism, festivals, plays.
Online Zoom performances.
You do the dunking now. That was a remembering of sorts.
Yeah, show some film while we get ourselves a cup of tea and a biscuit.
That's St Mary's, Rotherhithe, and here's the Mayflower.
So, is that where it started? By the pub?
Well, the pub wasn't there, that came later. And it wasn't called the Mayflower, though. They changed the name to attract the tourists.
Oh, but this is where it sailed from, isn't it?
No, that was across the river.
But the ship was registered here. This was its home port.
Yes.
building of a ship is the building of a symbol.
A floating aspiration.
With a prow to cut the waves and a hull to keep you dry.
A home, a shelter, a floating nest. Constructed to survive.
The ship is a bark we can toss our thoughts in, an overflowing bucket laden with hope.
I've got my biscuit.
Okay, stand by for symbolism. Deborah, this is something you found, isn't it?
Yes. In the States, Frank James and the newly formed American Indian movement held a protest in New Plymouth in 1970. They wanted to disrupt the 350th anniversary of the Mayflower. One of their actions was to board the replica of the Mayflower that had been built and to take a mannequin of Captain Christopher Jones and to throw him over the side.
To dunk him in the drink.
Now?
Oh, wait.
In the years that followed the Mayflower, others came. Many oppressed many. Stole land, stole souls. When nations meet, when people meet, do they bring a gun or a question? Do they take? Do they give? Do they barter? Do they banter?
When people meet with curiosity, with respect, and with a mind unset, their approach will be open. Their face will bear a smile perhaps, and they can break bread, different bread they've never before tasted.
When people come for gain, for profit, their approach will be singular. Their faces will be set. Their faith will be unquestioning. What will be broken will be promises, skulls, hearts.
We can choose.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Can you hear me? Great. Thank you very much indeed, cast. It was brilliant. Well done. I'm sorry for some of the technical problems we had there. My name's Jonathan Petherbridge. I'm the sort of project coordinator, leader on this. And we've got some time now to take any questions that people have for us. If you, I think Keris has been asking you already, and Lucy asked you at the beginning, if you have any questions you'd like us to respond to, please put them in Q&A rather than in chat. I'm going to look at what's in the Q&A now. And we have a question about Manifest Destiny. And we've got a question about Graham's objection. And we've got a question about the first boat to settle in America, which was the first boat to settle in America, and why is it not documented in history? Who would like to pick up on Manifest Destiny and whether it's applicable to other First Nations people? And would you like to? You might.
I thought you might call on me for that one. That is a very interesting question. I think, in my opinion, manifest destiny is a very American sort of term. It was the doctrine of conquering the land from sea to shining sea with the kind of the right of God. It was the Americans' destiny to take the land from the Atlantic to the Pacific. I suppose some might argue that that has been similar to what's going on in Israel and Palestine, but I think I have to admit I know very little about Australia, so my apologies. I guess you could see parallels, certainly, and obviously the decimation and genocide of Aboriginal and Indigenous people across the world is an atrocity and must be corrected and made reparations for, and we must continue to make amends.
Yeah.
But I would say that manifest destiny itself, I think, is a particularly American thing.
It
but
is.
I'm open to be argued with. So.
Yeah. Anybody else want to say anything about manifest destiny? I mean, manifest destiny is a concept that underpins. It's a movement and a concept that underpins white supremacy, basically. So Graham's objection, I'll do this one. Graham's objection to so Graham's a very good friend. There's been two fantastic local historians, Ruth Cruz O'Brien, who should also get a name check, who I think is watching this afternoon, has also helped us hugely. Lots of people have helped us. Graham has helped us. Graham wrote a book recently. He wrote it too late. He only came out in November or December, far too late for us. And he was trying to point out London's role in the whole thing. And he feels that he read the whole script, and he feels the script gives the Pilgrims a rough deal. And that's why I included his email in the text. Because I wanted to rehearse his arguments. He's an experienced historian, and he has a point. But this was our collective take on the whole thing. The first boat to settle in America, and why is it not documented in history? Come on, hands up. Who knows what the first boat was? Nobody's going to go Anne again.
Was it Leif Erikson in the landing with the Vikings in Canada?
Well, the question is the first boat to settle in America.
Oh, okay, so, sorry.
Jane, you tentatively put your hand up as well.
My hands up. Well, we don't know the name of King Arthur's boat, do we?
Well, did he settle?
And also, a boat is different from a ship, isn't it?
Oh, hello.
As we well learned. So that's all I'll say on that one.
No, come and tell us what's the difference.
You can put a boat on a ship, but you can't put a ship on a boat.
Oh, that's a good one. Okay.
So a boat could mean like a little fishing boat that stopped there and the crew came off and landed. So that's how I'd answer that question.
My mind is going to a certain canal in the Middle East at the moment. Yeah. Okay, so and then the next question from Stephen Potter is why does the Mayflower have such a special status in American history rather than any of the other settlers before and after? Oh, come on, Eva, I think maybe.
Well, perhaps the first settlement in North America, as far as I know, and it's quite limited, I think it was Jamestown, which was not a success. Was actually quite an terrible failure. So the Mayflower seems to be the next one who settled with families, and and the Pilgrims did not come for gain, or they did not intend to go back. So they actually came really with the intention to make a go of living there. So
Yvonne,
perhaps that's...
Yvonne's put her finger up.
Yeah, I would like to add the Mayflower colony was also different from the other ones because it has a constitution, and I mean a kind of constitution which was the basis of the American Constitution.
And, you know, first, Bradford wrote a long diary about it. Winslow wrote Mort's relation about it. They're two central settlers. So they documented their own story, first of all, and they had some positive things to write. Whereas, as you said, Eva, in Jamestown, you know, people were eating each other, basically. It was not a good story. So the Americans strangely didn't want to have their founding myth being sort of cannibalism. They wanted it to be slightly more positive. So to an extent, they chose this, but they, you know, we're increasingly finding the other side of the story, perhaps. Anybody else know? So the next one is on the opinion of the Thanksgiving protests today. And are we intending to produce your Mayflower performances in America? Yeah, we're going straight to Broadway. No. All the scripts, if anybody wants to produce the scripts, not only of this, but also of the arrival and the measuring and the deal, those 3 other scripts, they're all available as flat packs if anybody wants to do them anywhere. Quite happy about that. Thanksgiving. Andrew just put his hand up. I was going to ask Deborah.
Well, only to sort of note that the fact that most of us are going online here in different parts of London, but the audience isn't. So, you know, we're reaching America yesterday and today. Give us a wave, Jill, and anyone else who's on the other side of the pond today.
Yeah, Deborah, do you want to talk about the Thanksgiving protests, because you've taken part in them?
Well, sort of.
In America.
In America, yeah, because I lived there for about 6 years. The thing I was going to bring up was the thing about Frank James. I mean, he took the name Wamsutter, but I was linking him to King James, which is why we use that name. He, in 1970, is mentioned in the script, led a protest, and he'd been asked by the committee who were going to do this very big anniversary for the 350th to write a speech, and he did the speech, but it was critical in saying, like, this is for us, for the Native Americans, is not seen in the same way. But the organizer said, no, actually, we don't want that script. We're going to give you a different one, which is going to be what we want you to say. So he refused to do that, and instead, he did the speech, you know, at a monument, and he read the speech there and set up the movement in 1970. And if you go to the Mayflower 400, they've got information about Frank James on there. So yeah, there are, so that's has been 50 years plus of 50 years now, I suppose, of doing sort of a day of mourning on Thanksgiving.
Great, thanks very much indeed. The next one is the timing of the Mayflower was not an accident, but a planned theft of native land. Who do you think benefits from this whole myth of the innocent religious pilgrimage and erasure of decades of attacks on natives? Who would like to take that? I will take that if nobody else will take that. I clearly think the Americans have benefited from this myth. I think myth is not quite the right word. It's a fabricated and embroidered part of the story which has been partially told. And clearly the Americans, to an extent, it took a long time, but the English benefited. But it took a long time after the Mayflower arrived for any benefits to accrue. We've tried to, in our script, be clear about how the colonialism that followed the Mayflower traumatized people, and how that trauma has echoed down and always echoes down through generations. And we have tried to tell the story in a complex and layered way. And I hope we've done it justice. I don't know. Does anybody want to answer, to add to that? Tracy?
Yeah, just to say that through the process and each of us choosing a character and doing research about why they went and where they were coming from, I think, you know, we all became aware of all the complexities and how it wasn't a simple story, and that different people, there were different motives. And I think certainly my character, Catherine Carver, and her family had fled religious persecution, and they'd gone to Holland originally. And you know, as came out in the script, we very much, the Mayflower brought families who wanted to settle and learn from the Indians and make it work. So I think, and you know, as Lucy, as Dorothy in her part, you know, she was talking about things that happened later. And so I think, you know, the intention may be changed. And I think, you know, we've discovered that there's so much more to learn about it all.
And Jane, you had your hand up as well.
I think it's just really echoing what Tracy says. You know, it's not one thing in isolation. People who fled from England to Leiden then had to flee from there because of, you know, wars that were going on between Holland and Spain. So, you know, it just goes on and on and on. And when people arrived in America, you know, things didn't stop. It was quite useful for some tribes, as we said, to make a contract with people who'd arrived to, you know, my enemy's enemy is my friend. But it kind of, so it just goes on and continues to go on and on. So I think it for me, it just shows that nothing must be taken in isolation.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to take the next one, which is, what has it been like creating theatre for Zoom? Ian.
Yes.
Yeah, what's it like creating theatre for Zoom?
I think it's really, yeah, for me personally, I find it quite frustrating and nerve-wracking. It's a very odd medium, and you can't actually see what you're doing or the audience, and there's a lot of things that can go wrong. But when it comes together, it can be quite exciting. But it's so easy for kind of random technical issues such as signal and bandwidth, etc., to play havoc with things. So you have to be quite kind of playfully accepting of that, I guess.
Yeah. Anybody else want to talk about Zoom? Kath, no, Yvonne's got her hand up.
Me now, or?
Yes, go Yvonne, yeah.
What is really strange or odd is that when you are thinking, you are talking in the script, you are talking to someone, and you are talking to that person on the screen, but apparently that person is not there on the screen at all. So you talk to the person, but the person is in another box there. So,
yeah. I think you've done very well. It's completely different performing live. Kath, do you want to say anything about?
I'm thinking that it's all quite surreal, really, because you're sitting in a room with loads of accoutrement around you in your bits, and you haven't got that as a human contact with other people getting ready for the show or the performance or whatever. But in rehearsal, it's just quite tough staring at a screen for hours, isn't it? And we tried to keep our rehearsals quite short and succinct because you know, otherwise you'd end up with a headache, basically. And you don't end up with a headache when you're rehearsing a show in a performance space or in a rehearsal space, because you're physically moving and you're having lovely interactions and stuff. So yeah, it can be quite tiring, but at the same time, it's been brilliant to have this creative opportunity and outlet over the last year.
Don't you think that it's been quite fun, though? I think I've enjoyed it, the process, and it's been okay to do it from home because everything is limited at the moment. So this is better than nothing.
Yeah.
And I thought that this worked rather well.
Yeah. Thanks. How did we ever collaboratively write such a complicated script on Zoom? Who wants to take that? Lucy.
I think one of the things the first line kind of I say in the script is that we've been charting this story for 3 years, which is true. So we have the advantage of 2 years in a rehearsal space, and researching and, you know, compiling a whole library of resources. So yeah, it's only kind of been the last year that we've actually had to to tackle adapting it onto an online version, but we had the benefit of a series of live performances. Our measuring event, the deal, and the arrivals were all in-person events, and they've all massively fed into this section, which we never really anticipated actually doing. This has become an additional leg because of the implications of the last year and our responses to the pandemic, and the fact that that has a direct relationship to the experience of the native peoples in America because of the pandemic that they'd just been through. Suddenly there was a different frame of reference, and it did shift our perspective and what we want, the stories we wanted to tell from it. So that doesn't quite answer your question, but it's yeah, it's been a huge coming together of a lot of material, and probably the most difficult thing is the amount that's have to been left on the cutting room floor, because it's impossible to distill such a complex, layered and durational story into about 45 minutes. So you have to watch all the other things. You'll have to get the pamphlets, the booklets, and watch the other films, because there's more out there.
Yeah. Thanks very much indeed. Then somebody's asking about the inspired moments, the ships and rivers and all of that sort of stuff. I'll answer that. But basically, whenever we do vernacular theatre, I call this vernacular theatre, and I'm calling this vernacular webinar theatre. My observation, and it's really learning from Simon Startin, who wrote our first script, Blackbirds, and he dropped in moments of poetry. And it feels to me that sometimes when you're being quite factual and you're dealing with a lot of maybe it might be verbatim theatre, or it might be reported theatre, or it might be historical fact, stopping and just having a moment of poetry is important. And it's nice to write, and people like Jane, I think it was Jane that said that ship doesn't speak, the ship needs a voice, because we'd given the Thames a voice, we'd given the earth, I gave the earth a voice. The earth, in the original script, the earth is a character, the land is a character that we meet, and who talks about the way in which the land is used, taken for granted, handled in different cultures in different ways. But that was in a longer text. Somebody would like us to say a bit more about the separatists and why it was convenient for James to get rid of them. Alison, do you want to have a go at that? The separatists? Are you on mute?
The separatists.
Yeah. And why James wanted to get rid of them?
Well, I mean, to be honest, I don't know a great deal about them, but it sounds as if, I mean, I don't know as much as the rest of you have been researching it for 3 years, but, there were these, I mean, within the church, there are these sort of democratic impulses, when you've got people coming together wanting to pray in the way that they want to, reading stuff and discussing it, then all of that, I mean, for governments down the centuries has all been kind of very threatening, because, there was a king, there was a hierarchy, there was, and any kind of ideas that challenged those hierarchies were to be, well, often brutally put down over the years. So, the separatists perhaps were challenging the state in many respects through religion, and
Well, they were not obeying the state. They felt that the state was oppressive, that the church was a government tool.
Well, exactly, and it certainly was, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And continued to be. You couldn't do much except through the church.
Yeah. And I didn't realize until quite recently that you literally went to church to hear government policies as well. Recent laws were announced from the pulpit. I didn't understand that. Jan, you put your hand up, I think.
Yeah, I mean, this is quite interesting, because when I remember when I joined the project, I was conflating Puritans and separatists into one group, and then learnt quite soon that that wasn't the case, that the Puritans were about, as it says in their name, about purification, but wanted to stay within the church, whereas the separatists wanted to go their own particular way. And I also like the fact they called themselves the saints on the ship, and everybody else was a stranger. So they were very, I mean, separatist is certainly the right name for them. And it, yeah, I'm just picking up what Alison was saying, really, and what Beth is saying, that clearly they were a threat. And you can't, how long can you, as we know, again, as resonance, as Lucy was saying about nowadays, how often can you just go on locking everybody up for not doing what you want them to do? And eventually it's easier just to get rid of them.
I'm just trying. Oh, Ian, go.
Yeah, no, just that when I started reading about them, which was only kind of recently, I was quite surprised at how distinct they were from the Puritans, and also how varied their opinions were, and the fact that they saw things as such as marriage as not necessarily being something that the church dealt with directly. Some of them felt that it was much more of a civil arrangement, and they actually had a much more kind of nuanced relationship with the kind of scriptures they went back to kind of question and kind of decide what was essential than I'd assumed. I had the stereotype of the Puritan, and they were clearly quite radical and quite different from that. And it seemed to have been had a big impact on the way that they kind of shared out and planned their community.
Okay, I'm slightly distracted because I'm trying to follow what's happening in chat as well, which I'm sure everybody's looking at. And people are trying to encourage Nick Hannard to put a question in to the Q&A. And there's a bit, just so I don't know if everybody's looking at the chat, but there's a bit of a debate about whether or not the script and the performance, in a way, did justice to the story, and also the word that's coming up is genocide. Whether genocide was something that we should have dealt with more fully, and whether it was glossed, or whether it was glossed over. The genocide that was not to do with the disease, the pandemic occurred before the Mayflower got there, and then occurred again sort of 8 years after they'd arrived. But the genocide really was the Indian Wars, which occurred 20 years later, a generation later. That generation later were descendants of the Mayflowers. But they were also joined by many ships of Puritans who had come from England and from other countries in Europe as well. Maybe we majored on the Mayflower too much, and maybe we took a Eurocentric view too much. I think that's a danger, undoubtedly. But I want personally, my mission in it was to go, this is, what do we tell ourselves about colonialism? And it feels to me we don't tell ourselves much at all. It is not taught in schools, and therefore, I wanted to go into the monarchy, the mercantile, the city roles in this as well. Does anybody else want to add to anything to that? Anne, go.
Yeah, just to say, in the chat, there's some people talking about how, having gone through the education system in America, you aren't taught the settlers arrived and it was peaceful and Thanksgiving dinner was a good thing, and that's certainly the kind of education that I had. And I think that through this project, I've learned so much more about the history from the sides of, further back what the separatists did in England, but then also the impact on the Native Americans. And I think the suggestion that we've maybe lacked in empathy is a bit unfair. And I think that we definitely tried to present both sides. And I think that for me, the whole learning process has been incredibly moving and incredibly challenging. And it's definitely been something that has opened my eyes, not just to Native Americans, but we've talked about white supremacy in great detail in our research. And I think that all of us have been through a kind of a deep process in making this. And it's a bit disappointing that that may not have come through in the script.
Thanks, Anne. Judith.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. It was a complete revelation to me. But I think what the play was trying to do was to show that this was a sort of an evolutionary process in a sense. And that is how genocides eventually happen, isn't it? It's not like everybody says, let's go and do a genocide. This is why we have to learn about history, because we need to be able to see the trajectories. And there's the moment in the script when they asked Dorothy about, she said, they said, why did you go? And she said, oh, because of food, And then they said, but what about the people? And she was like, well, I don't know, there weren't any people. And that's the point, isn't it? That people weren't thinking about that aspect of it. And that's why we learn history, so that we can kind of learn from those lessons, if you like.
Somebody else had their hand up, I think.
Harriet.
Go, Harriet.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to second what Anne said, really, which was, the suggestion that we didn't empathize with the Native Americans. For me personally, that has been the biggest journey for me doing the project. Was I started out knowing embarrassingly little about the whole thing. Yes. I just was ignorant. I just didn't know. And the main thing I've taken away from it is colonial violence and the aftermath and how horrendous it was and how we all have a duty to understand it. And so, yeah, I mean, if that didn't come across, then that's a shame, but that's what I personally took from it.
Thanks. Eva, I'm being asked to move on to another subject, but come.
Just very quickly want to say, because I have to agree, it is a Eurocentric perspective, and we also saw it through Dorothy's eyes, or from her point, because that is our sort of culture. We can and we have really done a lot of research so to be shocked and appalled what happens throughout the ages in colonialism and genocide. But we have also to be aware that this is our perspective, that's our history. So, just to be aware of it, and and I think that, the script has actually made it clear that's where we are coming from.
There's two other questions I want to take. One of them is, I want to take the last one first and then go back. It's from Nick Hansford, and he's saying, the line at the start, the stupid arrogance of the white man. Why was the choice made to include that? Was it enough to cover the psyche of the colonist? Well, Nick, it was written the day after the storming of Congress, and I'm sorry, when you're looking at the history of this and you're staring on your screen at Donald Trump, I can't not make that link. It's not trying to cover the psyche of the colonists. It's trying to show that the psyche of the colonist and that perspective runs today and has run and runs through. That's why it's there, and it's supposed to go crunch. It's supposed to. And then, okay, so then we're being asked a little bit about the theatre of it, and we'll be asked by Miss Kerris Johnson-Fraser how the roles were assigned in a community play. This is different from the usual audition process, right? Who hasn't spoken? Somebody must not have spoken, surely. No,
I haven't said anything.
Keitha. How are the roles assigned?
Well, I'm not quite sure, actually. Well, partly when we chose characters, some of that sort of seemed to fit with the emphasis of the story. I think some people sort of have come into this event really enjoying the acting part of it, and so have sort of shine in the in the spotlight, and others of us have come into it. Well, lots of people come into it for different reasons, really, and I think depends which night we've been available to rehearse.
Well, that's what I was going to say. That we had to go into intensive rehearsal. It only went from being a live performance to being a Zoom thing back in December, I think, something like that. And that's the point at which we had to sort of reorganize how we were going about things. And you're right, the available, who could make a Monday night ended up in the Monday group. Lucy.
Yeah, I was just realizing that people who don't know much about London Bubble might not know that. So yeah, we never have an audition process. Nobody ever auditions at Bubble, and so some of us might be here because we're particularly interested in making theatre. Some of us might be here because we're more interested in the subject matter and the history. Some of us might be here because we've got an affiliation to Rotherhithe and because of the Mayflower's links. We're like, oh, I don't know anything about that, and there's a theatre company doing something, so I'll join in. And also there are a lot of people who've been involved in the process that aren't represented here because they've been involved along the way. And what's always lovely about doing these longer processes in the lead up to a performance, that it's not necessarily about coming to perform, it's about coming to be part of the process. So it means it's a much more co-created and much more organic process when it comes to actually who's doing what, or we've developed a lot of characterization and a lot of the fact that Deborah somehow got herself cast as King James ages and ages ago, and it was just like, well, no one else is going to be King James because she's done the research and she knows the stuff, and it's just going to be her. So yeah, it's a little bit organic, a little bit process, and a little bit who's available what night.
And Jane, you had your hand up.
I was just going to say there's so much more that kind of went into this final performance, and I mean, Kath and I did some stuff when we were the women who were on the boat, and that was a live performance. But there's quite a lot of little videos that have been put together, which was homework, filming ourselves, which maybe wasn't always enjoyable, but Kath's edited them really well. So, there's such a lot that's gone into this final showing, but I would encourage people to have a look at the earlier stuff as well, and then you can see what other stories really that are involved.
Thank you. And Andrew, I think did you tentatively? You didn't. Okay. There's a comment in the Q&A which is about a policy that colonial violence would be taught in secondary schools that apparently the Labour Party had in their manifesto. Mm-hmm. And would we support an independently funded project to address this issue? Absolutely. Absolutely. And personally, I would also, I mean, this may sound quite strange, but I would also support the use of drama, the use of theatre in order to explore history. The idea of creatively and openly, discursively approaching subjects I think is a way for us to learn and to build connections as well. Perhaps we should draw this to a close unless anybody else has any other things they're burning to say or ask. I will say thank you very much indeed for coming along and giving your Sunday afternoon up to this. I do hope that this won't be the end of this project and that we will be doing something else at some point in the future. What I do know is that we do have a number of pamphlets, which Lucy referred to, which can be got from London Bubble. Just just go on the website and send us an email. There's 3 beautiful pamphlets. He said, reaching above his desk to see if he could wave one at the camera. Can't find it. Hey, Jane does. Which basically we try to share our research as we went along. And we're hoping that we may be able to animate this live and direct. Thank you very much indeed. And I'm going to ask people to little round of applause in your own home. Everybody in their own home can just do a little very, very formal English round of applause and wish we were together and go back to your